So what you do is you go on the site, you apply to come home, you indicate where you'd like to quarantine. If the inspection is done, if it can be done there, it will be done there. If it can't be done there, then you'd have to indicate an alternate site, and we can inspect that site as well, and we'll make arrangements to have that done.
Just to add that a lot of persons have been frustrated over the last few weeks about the inability to quarantine at home. And the reason why that inability to quarantine at home has not been there is because we fear that persons, Anguillians, would breach quarantine and get out into the community and have some community spread. What we have realized is that in other Caribbean islands, those community spreads that have occurred have almost 100% occurred because the local people believe that they do not have to quarantine, and in some instances have breached quarantine and there have been community spread. So that is why we have had an apprehension to allow for home quarantine. Now we are evolving to the point where we will allow home quarantine, but we have ensured that we have some stringent legislation that ensures that if you breach that quarantine, there are consequences, and you won't be able to call my number and ask for mercy. And I'm sure you won't be able to call the number of the parliamentary secretary or the premier and ask for mercy, because at the end of the day, while we may be the lawmakers, we are not the law enforcers, and those penalties will be enforced to the strictest measure of the law, which the premier have said before, it's $38,400. Maybe we may make it US, but right now it's $38,400 EC dollars and 6 months in prison for breaching protocol. So it's up on us, for us to protect ourselves. Every one of us have family members who are vulnerable. And yes, you may have tested negative before you came to Anguilla. You may have tested negative on arrival to Anguilla, but that does not mean that you're negative. So we are admonishing everyone who is given the opportunity and privilege to home quarantine to stick to the home quarantine and do not breach and do not allow anyone to breach, because we will have constables, we will have the Royal Anguilla Police Force, we will have surveillance, and the general public will be looking at you. And if you do so, there will be severe consequences to your actions.
Let me just add something to what the minister just said. There is no way the government can maintain the cost of quarantine. It is just prohibitively expensive. We have done it for the last 6 months since June, and it has cost millions of dollars. Beginning at close to the end, beginning 1st of September, we began to charge a little bit for a person quarantine. We did not charge the full economic cost. We could not, because we realized it would have been too hefty. But even what we charged was still very expensive for a lot of people who couldn't really do it. So at this stage now, people have to realize that they have a social responsibility, not only to themselves, but to the country, to ensure that they behave properly and that they respect the rules of the engagement. But in addition to that, we will be having surveillance in place. Any person who's home quarantined will have to be checked 3 times a week by the health team, for temperature checks, well-being checks, and so forth. In addition to that, they'll be randomly checked by the Anguilla Police Force to ensure that they're home. Anybody breaching, and we have to be very, very strong on this. We have to be very, very strong on this. Anybody found in breach will be dealt with the full extent of the law. It is a small society, it is a small country, and we have to ensure that we protect the people of Anguilla with limited resources. Our hospital is just 32 beds. In addition to that, we have about another 10 beds for COVID-related cases, 8 ventilators. We cannot allow this virus to overreach and overrun the country. So we're making a step to ensure that people quarantine at home, as you've been asking, but with that comes your responsibility. And I must say that responsibility is an onerous one. Most people have been coming from the UK and the US. You know what it is like out there. You know what it is like out there. Those countries with a lot of resources cannot manage what's happening. In Wisconsin right now, they're setting up a field hospital just outside of Milwaukee because the main hospitals are 90% full to capacity. So they're now starting a hospital outside to ensure that there's overflow, that they can cope. We cannot get to that state in Anguilla. So we're asking people when they come in and they quarantine at home, please ensure that you follow the rules of engagement, because we'll be very tough with people who break quarantine.
I know you want to end, but I have one quick question. We keep saying quarantine, quarantine. Could you just quickly go over the parameters or the boundaries of a home quarantine? If I'm quarantining, am I in my bedroom and nobody can come in there and visit? What exactly does home quarantine entail?
Well, that's why we have to assess the house. Because certainly if we assess the house and you have other people in there who have been in Angola for the last 8-10 months and you're now coming in, you won't be able to quarantine there. You won't be able, that's just common sense. If the house is designed in such a way that there's an apartment offshoot, or there's a basement or our own stuff, and there's ways to limit interaction between, then we can consider that, certainly. But regular quarantine does not allow for the mixing of persons. It can't.